Did everybody,
Jay?
how many of you were able to come last, or if you came last time, did you enjoy the presentation last time?
Yes.
And were you left with any thoughts or questions or comments that you'd like to share? I think we're always interested in how you respond to things. What did you think of spiritual alphabet and or the work of spirituality in practice? Were you familiar with it already? Were any of you familiar with that already?
Jay, it's Jenny Cole. I have a question, and it might sound a little bit flip, but it's not. Does the alphabet exist in other languages? As I started thinking about words in other languages for some of the choices, and I realized they would not start with the same letter. So I has the couple addressed that and branching out in that way?
Well, all that I know is that it's been translated into Chinese.
Ah.
but maybe other languages, but I do know that it's been translated into Chinese. And that's a really great question. So is there a word for attention? What would that word be in Chinese? For reverence, what would it be? And how do you say being present? So I think that's really an excellent question. The answer to which I don't know, but I will ask. I will ask.
Jay, this is King Grunwald, Jay. I'm just going to let you know that I'm here, okay?
All right, good.
Jay, I wasn't present last week, but I just finished looking at the video and got through Marianne's initial explanation of the alphabet and how it functions, the spiritual practices. And it was very relatable from my perspective, because Jennifer and I come from the Baha'i tradition. And we believe that humanity has a twofold moral purpose, to transform the self and to transform the society. And we do it by finding within ourselves the virtues of God that have been implanted in our hearts. And the practices are the same as the virtues. And of course, there's an infinite variety. And we actually have a system that was developed by a friend of mine that focuses on virtues and educates children with 52 virtues. And you take one a week and focus on it and use it as a basis of family discussions and so forth.
And each card has what the meaning of the character quality is, and how you show it in your life, and how you can affirm it in your person. Like assertiveness is, I am assertive, I freely express my own ideas, I think for myself, and I do what I feel is right. I am my own. So, and each one of these comes with that. So it's kind of nice because you can focus then thought on developing quality.
What was the source?
This is from Virtues Project International, and it has been translated into many languages. The Virtues Project International.
Thank you.
Let's see, www.virtuesproject.com.
So Jay, wondering if Marianne's work has been used to develop something like character classes for schools and so forth, because it seems like it'd be really applicable that way.
That's extremely interesting. I don't know the answer to that. I know it's been used in prisons, and I know it's been used in secular public settings. I myself have used it in a local public library where anybody could come and we would walk through the qualities of heart and mind. That's what I call them. It's been used in churches, to be sure. One church it's been used in Arkansas is All Saints Episcopal Church in Russellville. Terry Daly used it for a whole session there. I would like to think it's been used in synagogues and mosques and sanghas. I think that would be great. I don't know that it has, but that would be natural. You know, I find it important myself in working with elderly people. And I mean people with dementia. And to look for moments in their lives which embody one or the other of those qualities. So I think it's useful in many, many settings. Well, I think what we want to do today, by the way, is this is kind of part 2 of the general introduction. And Sophia and I will lead it, but since I myself will be leading the next section next week on silence, I would like to give Sophia maximum time today to respond to a couple of the letters in her own way, however she wants to do it. So Sophia, you want to kind of take over from here and we'll get started?
Yeah, let's do that. And I think Meg has a question. Let's just take that one question and then we can start our class for today. And no, I am not going to take more spotlight than you, Jay. So Meg, your hand was raised. Is it something that you wanted to say?
Yes, it very much was. Thank you. It's not a question, it's a statement. So in Judaism, we have Musar. Annabelle is on the board of the Musar Institute. Barry has written a Torah study, a book about all of the Torah portions and how they relate to that. Quick definition, it's all about soul traits. So Jay, when you brought up whether it had been in a synagogue or not, it would very much depend on whether or not that synagogue had gone through a serious Musar study. Completely, very, very similar. It's all where you belong on this continuum. Too much of a doormat, too much of a bull. So there, I'm done. That was all I wanted to add.
Yeah, I think soul traits is a very nice phrase too. It can be understood in so many different ways, but one way would be soul traits. Thanks for that phrase.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Meg. I'm actually pretty familiar with Musar, and I find so many intersections between Musar and Sufi traits or the spiritual traits in Sufi Islam. So thank you for bringing it up. So anyways, let's start today's class. And I am going, those of you, I think everybody was here last time, but if there was somebody who was not here, I'm Sophia Said, Executive Director of Interfaith Center. We have a mission of reducing the fear and hatred among world religions. This specific fall session is co-sponsored by Spirituality and Practice along with the Interfaith Center. And you all should have the website by now. This is the book which I actually bought, Spiritual Literacy, as I study on the spiritual alphabet, and I'm finding it really, really useful. Last time we had our first introduction with Mary and Bassett. If you were not in the class, I sent out the video to everybody. I hope you all saw it. If not, take some time to it. It was really meaningful. Today, Jay and I are planning to go over a few alphabets in general to give a second part of the introduction. But the way the class will go after today is that every time we will have one guest speaker who will be focusing on one specific letter of that day. And the primary mode of teaching, of course, will be storytelling of their spiritual or life journey. And then Jay and you all will discuss. So today, as we were thinking which letters to do, I thought I'll do a couple of letters. And I looked at the list of the letters, and the things which immediately popped out to me were very evident, things that I practice in my daily life, like, or I work on, P for peace, or C for compassion. But then I thought I want to focus on something which I myself do not intentionally practice, but it has been a part of my life. So I started looking at the letters, spiritual letters again. I read each one of them and their descriptions. And I picked 2. And those 2 are H for hospitality and R for reverence. And I'm going to briefly explain what they mean to me, and then Jay will take over and he will talk more about a few more letters. So hospitality and reverence. These are the two things which actually I never intentionally tried to practice or thought about. But when I read the letters, I was like, these are some of the core values that I have been raised with. And they are such an important part of my life. And I never actually even thought about them till now, till I start reading this book actually. So I grew up in a household where I remember my mom would always cook food in big dishes, twice or three times or four times the number of people who were present in the household. And if we ask her why so much food, and she would always say, oh, you never know, anybody can come, anybody can visit, you never know, you might need it for somebody. And I remember we have a big house, we have 5 bedrooms, but most of the time, I would say at least 80 to 90% of the time, we never had our bedrooms to ourselves because we always had guests at our house, short-term guests or long-term guests, some guests who would stay for months or even years. A cousin who's here to do her master's in a big city, or an uncle who's recently moving from America. This is the example of long-term guest, but lots of short-term guests. My brother friend who's passing through the city, or our friends. And after living in America for 26 years, I feel my house is pretty much like this here, even in America. And if I don't have guests in my house for a long time, like long time means a few weeks, I don't like, my whole family doesn't like it. We want to have people living with us in the house because we lived in a very open household where hospitality was a core value. Interestingly, when I was reading the book, it said that hospitality and hostility, they're both derived from the same words, but they couldn't be any more different because hospitality is about welcoming everybody, whereas hostility is about having an inner conflict in our hearts. And we should practice hospitality to get rid of hostility, which was very interesting for me because we are living in a world where there is so much division, and we're living in troubled times. And I think that to be hospitable, we need to accept pluralism. It should be a natural condition for us. We should be able to celebrate the diversity of all the creations around us. We should become citizens of the world who not only open their homes, but also their hearts to everybody. So if you've been to a Muslim country in specific, but anywhere around the world where the culture is very collectivist, you will see that people are very, very hospitable. At least that's what I saw when I visited Saudi Arabia. I am from Pakistan, but Saudi Arabia, Dubai, Turkey, Egypt, that people really want to be hospitable to their guests because entertaining a guest and making them comfortable is extremely important, because hospitality is a triangular relationship between 3 people in our culture: the host, the guest, and God. So it's not just 2 people. And that's why it makes it so special, because there is a divine connection there. And then I started thinking about hospitality, and I thought that it's not this core value of hospitality is not specific to my culture or Muslims. Actually, it comes from the 3 monotheistic faiths, from Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, because this perspective of welcoming the stranger, and not only welcoming the stranger because he's a stranger, but also the recognition that we were once strangers too, is very core to all these 3 faiths. And our patriarch prophet Abraham, who I believe is the father of all 3 religions, he was so hospitable that there are stories about the tent of Abraham which would be open from all sides, because he wanted to welcome people anytime and all the time. And the story goes that at the time of the meal, he would not eat unless he had guests with him. So he would often go out and look for people to invite them to dinner so he doesn't have to eat alone. So, as I was reading these letters, I thought I will bring hospitality up as a springboard for discussion with all of you because I think it's something that we need in today's world. Um, we need to become citizens of the world. So that's my first letter. And the second one, which I'll briefly talk about, is which is harder for me to talk about because I don't know how to translate. It's called adab, ADAB, adab. And that ties into our discussion that we were just having, that do we have these letters in other languages? Well, I don't know if we have the letters in other languages. I come from Pakistan, but the language where I take my values from or my teachings, spiritual teachings from is Arabic. So there are no spiritual letters there, but there are these spiritual values there, the values of heart and mind that we are studying in this course. And adab is a very core value in our faith, which is grounded in our holy book, which we learn from our prophet. And the closest word that I could find to adab in this spiritual alphabet is reverence, from R. So remembering my own childhood, I mean, we were trained to stand up when an adult walks in the room. Do not sit till they have already sat. Do not speak before them. Be aware of the expectations that the people around us have from us. Sitting with respect, eating in silence. And I remember my mother always telling us, take your shoes off before you eat, because you should be in contact with the earth before you eat, and never have the TV on, because there is a reverence for food. So adab is kind of, if I can translate it, it's kind of a radical respect that we have, number one, for ourselves, then for people around us, then for animals and the nature around us, and then of course for God, our creator. It's hard to translate in English because it's a behavior and etiquette and ethics for the universe around us, but it's also the practical implication for it. And when I really try hard to find the best way to translate adab, I think it's living in a state of mindful reverence for the universe around us. So living in a state of mindful reverence for universe around us, which means that we acknowledge the presence of sacred in everything around us, in our own bodies, in the people around us, in each one of you who's here, in the things around us, which also implies that nothing is created useless. Everything has value. And when we treat others around us and things around us with this state of mind, our interactions with them become immaculate. How do everything gets beautified? How do I pass the stranger in the grocery store? How do I talk to the mechanic when I take my car to them? How do I eat my spaghetti? How do I behave with my own body? Am I eating right? Am I abusing my body? Am I abusing the earth? Am I being wasteful? What am I doing for my neighbors and the future generations? So adab, this radical reverence is kind of the core of our faith. And our scholar says that there is no faith if there is no adab, because we can get all the knowledge from the world, but knowledge is useless unless it transforms us. It remains as information unless it's transformed us. And there is no transformation without adab. So if you go, I mean, if any of you have been around spiritual teachers, you will see that, you will even experience it nowadays, that the kind of respect that people give to spiritual teachers, carrying their shoes, kissing their hand and feet. Actually, people do that for their mothers too. Not eating before them, bowing before them, putting your hands on your heart, speaking softly in soft tones. You will see the example of this reverence I'm talking about. And I feel, I don't think I'm practicing it all the time, although I've been raised in a culture of reverence. But I think that when we practice or live in a state of reverence, as if everything around us has been touched by the sacred, everything has worth, nothing is trivial. Not only it builds self-esteem, but it also allows us to live in this state of amazement, in this deep feeling of wonder for the world, which is it's just an exquisite feeling. So I'm going to stop here for Reverence and Adab and pass it on to Jay before we come back to our discussion on both of these and more.
Let's see if anybody would like, however, right now to respond to anything you just said. We had one comment from Melanie saying, I relate to what you're saying. And Melanie, do you want to say a word about that? That might mean something to Sophia if you share just a little bit.
Yes, I find that we're not so different after all. We tend to think in America we are, because we are subscribed to labels. And my upbringing was communal. We may not have had a large home or a 5-bedroom, but because of the times, I was born in the 50s, and because of the time of segregation, there was a communalness to house, to embrace, to feed, to take care of. Sometimes I think we've gotten away from that because our society is so divided and polarized and scared of each other. So thusly, I grew up that way, Sophia, so I can understand that thusly in my career in academia and promoting this international multicultural, intercultural, then I began to do the same thing a step further, because my family was Muslims and Christians and so forth. I began to do the same thing globally. So I have in my personal life this global connection, which has drawn me to interfaith, because it's been the most difficult and the most challenging living here in Little Rock 3 years. Not impossible, just challenging and difficult. So I can relate. And there was a reverence and there was a spirituality about, and religion, but, you know, separating religion and spirituality. But there was some kind of expectation that you did this in our community. So it was a more community. And those that had very little did the same thing in a spiritual sense, because there was a reverence about serving the least of thee. I hope that makes sense, and that adds to what Sophia said. Thank you.
It does, absolutely.
Anybody else, just in response to what Sophia said?
I just wanted to say that her explanation of reverence really helped me understand the term better, and the idea of respect. That was really great. I thought that was really a great word for that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just respond that, Sophia, what you said, particularly about reverence, I'll agree with that. The depth and the beauty and the spaciousness and the value that reverence calls us to place on all humanity and all life, our animals and nature. I think that we've lost our way without being challenged to our core, that being a core value, and how I breathe, how I open up my eyes in the morning, So I was refreshed, and I appreciate that.
Thank you for saying that.
I'd like to add one. I interestingly thought of Anthony Bourdain's mortality. Read a book, our women's book group, and it happened to be at my house the night we discussed it, and I had found a video of when he was in Greece, and it was a, you know, there's all this amazing food around the world, but if you don't eat it in community, it's the same. And then, you know, I had a profound sadness later when he committed suicide, and read so many things about how he felt alone when he traveled. So I just thought it was an interesting tie-in to community.
Sophia, your comments reminded me of my son's experience. As a child, he lived with us when we were in Africa. As a youth, he spent the summer in China. He traveled in Latin America and spent another summer in service in Jamaica. And in college, he studied Arabic and got a scholarship to go to Jordan one summer, and said in all the places he had ever been, that was the place he experienced the most amount of hospitality and generosity. I also wanted to explain, this helps me understand why you have so much peacefulness.
Yeah.
I'd like to make a comment. Sophia, I really appreciated your saying about how in your household growing up, you ate in silence, your meals were in silence. And I never experienced that in my household ever. Only when I started doing retreats, silent retreats in different places, was I able to experience the difference that you feel when toward the food that you're actually eating, when you don't have the television on and you're not having conversations. And I found that that was one of my favorite things about going on retreats, was to have communal meals in silence. And so I appreciated that. And I had never thought of it as a reverence for the food, but what a lovely way to look at that. So thank you.
I'd also like to say that I really appreciate your your definition of and your view of reverence. It's so expansive and involves everything. And I've always lived my life with a reverence for all of life. And just a very brief things that happened to me one time on a trip in Africa. We were camping around a campfire out in the middle of the Kalahari Desert. And a woman, one of our guides, a woman, was sitting around. We were all kind of singing and talking. And all of a sudden she jumped up and ran into the tent. And she came out and said, I was just stung by a scorpion. And the average American would say, well, let's find the scorpion and kill it. And one of her compatriots came out and he found the scorpion and he delicately picked it up from the back and took it out into the desert and let it go. And to me, that was the biggest expression of a reverence for life I had ever seen in my life. And I just really have, that image just stuck with me. It has stuck with me my whole life.
Sophia, does any of this raise any thoughts or comments from you?
This is all beautiful. Actually, it tells me that how interconnected our spiritual values are. And we might be off here and there in timeline, but we all actually have some kind of an experience with this deep sense of adab, reverence, and hospitality. So yes, a lot of it feels actually very good to hear.
So I'll mention a couple more letters. And one is Z. And the other one is going to be G. If you look in the alphabet, Z is for zeal. But I think of it as zest. And so I think of Z as zest for life. And I've always, I do love life. And that doesn't mean that life is all happy. But there is happiness. But I think there's something really beautiful about life itself. And some people may not know if they believe in God or a higher power or a deeper source, but they love life. And I think in their love of life, they touch God. And my example is my mother. She died at 101. And so she knew all the stages of life. She knew what it was like to be 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and early hundreds. And her life was not easy. There was some tragedy early on. She certainly knew suffering. But she had a zest for life. And one expression in her was her sense of humor. And she laughed easily. And she thought things were funny. And she was a loving person. I don't want you to think the last word on my mother is she was a good laugher. But she could laugh. And one time I saw an interview with the Dalai Lama. And if you know the Dalai Lama laughs a lot. He's a good laugher. And he was once asked, why do you laugh so much? And he said, well, you know, there's almost any situation that, and he put his hands up and he said, you can look at it this way, or this way, or this way, or this way. And there's always some perspective that's kind of funny. And then as he was moving his heads this way and this way and this way and this way, I sensed in him a kind of flexibility of mind, a plasticity of soul that was free and spacious and was able to find humor. And I think my mom had that plasticity of soul too. If you have that love of life, you're going to suffer because life's going to bring all kinds of things with it. But there's something beautiful, and life unfolds momentarily. It's this moment, and then this moment, and then this moment. So I've always loved zest for life. And I mention that because I once had a student. By the way, I am a Christian, and I grew up a Methodist Christian, and kind of still am, but I'm also an oblate or a lay associate with a Benedictine monastery in Fort Smith. So this is to say I really have a love of Catholicism as well as the Protestant Christianity. So I tell you that because the next thing I'm going to say is going to sound like it's down on Catholicism, and I don't mean it to be as such. I just want to tell you this story. I had a student from Vietnam once, and I taught a course, I think it was called Varieties of Christianity. And we went over many kinds of Christianity. And this young student, she was struggling with her Christianity, and it was Catholicism. She was really struggling with it. And at one point I said, what's the issue? What's your struggle? And she said, I experienced my Catholicism is not having anything to do with life. I'm 22 years old. I love life, but I experience my Catholicism is about rules and guilt and do's and don'ts. But it didn't say it's okay just to love life. Now, I tell that story from my student because I do think a lot of people experience religion that way. It can be about do's and don'ts and rules and guilt. So I think religion, we need zest for life. It's part of the salvation of religion, if there is salvation. Now, the other story is G for gratitude. I need to tell a story here too, and this is not firsthand, but the story's always meant something to me. There was a British actress, and her name was Lila McCarthy. And one of her best friends was the British playwright George Bernard Shaw. And she wrote in her autobiography, she tells her story and a little bit about her relationship with Shaw, the playwright. And she says that one time she was undergoing a terrible, terrible, terrible divorce. And she just felt like her life was just that was it. And she went to her friend George Bernard Shaw, and apparently he lived out in the countryside, and she just said, "May I talk with you?" And he said, yes. And she went in, and it was an autumn night, and there was a fire, and she said, she just talked to him and said, my life is falling apart. My husband has left me, and it feels over. And she cried and cried and cried. And then after she told him that, he said to her, "Lila, let's walk outside." And they took a walk outside. And it was one of those starry nights, kind of like we're having now. And you walk outside and you feel the chilly air. And she said he didn't say anything on that walk. And then at one point he said to her, "Lila, look up at the stars. There's more. There's so much more." And she says that when she looked up at the stars, a burden was lifted from her shoulders, from her heart. And the burden was lifted because she realized there was more, so much more. And as she describes it, she experienced the fact that the universe was not all about her and her suffering. There were the stars. There's the cycling of the stars. And they have lives too. And they go on quite apart from us. So she experienced a kind of gratitude, but it was the gratitude of being in the presence of something that was more than her and at some level indifferent to her. It didn't depend on her. It didn't point back to her. And I had that experience myself during the pandemic. I had some health issues that emerged about the same time. And I would every morning get up and I'd walk out on the front porch where I lived early in the morning before dawn. And it was springtime. And I would hear the birds. And I realized that the birds, they were mating, they were establishing territory. I mean, the birds are pretty loud in the springtime. It was gorgeous. And it was a chorus, a choir. And it had nothing to do with me. They were doing their thing. Life goes on. There's more. There's so much more. So I think gratitude has a lot of faces, and sometimes we're grateful for people that will listen to us or help us or guide us or feed us. Of course, that's a good thing. But sometimes I think we can be grateful because there's a whole big world that's not about us. And that's kind of beautiful too. So Z and G, those are two other letters in the alphabet. I wish we could have gotten to P for playfulness. I like that one too, but that'll come later. Does that raise any questions for anybody or any thoughts that anybody has? Do you have any similar experiences? Kitty, yes.
I wanted to say something about rules. You talked about rules. And I think in general, Americans don't like rules, want to do whatever we want or not do whatever we don't want. And that's kind of an issue, a problem. So I saw a cartoon on Facebook where one person is really annoyed by seeing a fence called God's Laws. And he says, I hate that fence. I'm not going to be fenced in. And so he runs and jumps over the fence. And there's a cliff. So, and the other person said, wait, it's not a fence, it's a guardrail. Sometimes we're being told what to do or not do for our own protection.
I think that's true. I agree, Kitty. I think sometimes rules function as kind of a grace. Laws can be grace. They're gifts. And sometimes they can function to stifle life. It can go both ways, as I see things. Sally.
I was going to mention gratitude when, Sophia, you were talking about adeb and the reverence, because gratitude really does transform everything. If we're truly grateful for what we have, we're generous with it. That's hospitality. If you have nothing, your life is over, your husband is gone, your house burned down, you're hungry. If you find one thing to be grateful for, hearing those birds in the morning, it changes everything. So I put gratitude really up there. I think it's really important in my life anyway.
Yeah. And you know, Sally, that gives me the idea. Gratitude can be contagious in a good way. You have a little moment of gratitude and it spreads and kind of recolors your mood, your whole attitude toward life.
So, okay. So I was caught up in how the two things that you chose fit together so well. That when the woman was going through the bad divorce, her zeal was completely tamped down. And gratitude can unlock all of that.
Oh, that's interesting.
So, that's
yeah. Thank you. I hadn't thought of that, but I see what you're saying. Gratitude can unleash zeal.
Jay, this is Ken Grunwald again, and the gratitude fits in a scorpion story that I told. I don't think it really resonated, but what I was grateful to be around people, and these were indigenous people. And my view is we have far more to learn from indigenous people than they have to learn from us. And I saw that on display in that particular moment when he rescued that scorpion, which had just stung somebody, which was very painful. And what he was basically saying is, we're in its home, we're the visitor, And we have no right, you know, that has more right than we do to be here. And to see that displayed in such a way that is so contrary to the average American's response to something like that was just really opening. And I was, and just tied into what you were talking about, so grateful to be around that kind of experience. And it was so expansive to see how indigenous people view the world so differently from us, which to me is so much more gentle and accommodating than the average American is.
Mm-hmm. You know, Ken, there's a kind of humility there too. Part of the project of Western modernity is to say that Western modernity is normative and definitive for all, and that has led us to be extremely arrogant and to think that our ways are the ways. And so to be humble in the presence of people that obviously have so much wisdom and things we can learn from. H is for hospitality. I wish that H were also for humility. I think their publishers wouldn't let them keep adding letters. But for our purposes, let's let H be for humility too. Do I hear a second on that motion?
You've got it. And that thing that I brought up earlier about Musar, the soul trait that I was talking about, you always start with that one, and it is humility.
Yeah.
So it's the center of everything.
Yeah. Sophia, what are you thinking?
Let's have Sheila was about to speak. Let's have her join the conversation.
Thank you, Sophia. I just wanted to bring a personal story to what Ken was talking about. And the Buddhists taught me that reverence for life other than human, in the sense that I was brought up in a very solid Southern Baptist Christian family. And, you know, domination over the animals is a big thing in some Christian sects. And so it never even occurred to me not to swat a fly or a mosquito or, you know, rid the house of pests, because insects were seen as pests. And when I began to explore Buddhism and began to, I remember the first time I rescued a cockroach from my house and took it outside rather than kill it. And it was so moving to me to experience this. I was always afraid of roaches and insects, and so it was a big deal when I began that practice of reverence for life other than human. Mm-hmm. And I mean, obviously we had pets, and, you know, pets were okay. They were, but insects were a whole different story. So, and I continued to do that. And my grandkids just are amazed that Nana will go and trap a roach or a fly or something to take outside rather than just kill it. So I'm trying to pass that on, but it has meant a lot to me. So thank you for sharing that, Ken, because it brought up my personal experience with honoring the sacred in all things. So thank you.
Actually, my hat off to you, Ken. My hat is off to you, and just to let you know, you're not alone. We have a paper cup and a piece of cardboard that we use to rescue spiders in the house all the time and take them outside.
Exactly.
It's a very common practice. It's actually a practice of joy in our house. When my kids were little, we read them a story about how our spider saved the life of Prophet Muhammad when he was being persecuted by people. And we decided at that time that we will never kill spiders because there is a role for every creature. So we stopped killing them, and every time there is a spider, we just trap it either in a jar, or mostly we pick it up with a paper towel and take it outside. But then that practice expanded to everything, to beetles and grasshoppers or whatever walks in the house. So it's a very common practice in our house on a daily basis that we catch insects and we take them out and release them outside. And my kids find a lot of joy in that, actually.
Dan, go ahead. Unmute.
I wanted to pick up on something that Kitty said about laws and rules and so forth. And it's a personal belief I have about religious versus spiritual, because I think that sets up a false dichotomy. I don't think there's anything inherent in being religious that prevents you from being spiritual. And I don't think there's anything in spiritual that prevents you from being religious. And I think maybe there's a little bit of overlap where the two meet together. And I'm sure you experience that when you go to the Benedictine monastery. Is it a monastery? Is that what you call it?
Yes.
Where I'm sure you find an intense spirituality in the performance of the rituals that are there. And so I'd just like to put that out there for conversation.
I think that's certainly true. Ken, or Dan and others, do you know people who have experienced religion as so much about rules that somehow life was lost? So much about rules and guilt and do's and don'ts that for them,
yes,
life was lost. And so it's really their experience that I want to honor.
Yes.
You know, they experienced their religion that way. So we might say, well, it doesn't have to be that way. And it doesn't. I agree. But for some people it is. And they look for a word that, you know, you can hear them. They'll say, I don't believe in, no organized religion for me, thank you. But I still have something like a spiritual side. And I just want to be sensitive to them and say, you get to define your terms. You know.
I agree with you. The way my father used to put it is religious organizations are like lamps. If they're plugged into the spirit, they're a source of illumination.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they're just a lamp.
That's a good metaphor. That's a good metaphor.
For me, religion and spirituality has been really overlapping. I understand what you say, Jay, about all those people who are not able to feel spirituality and feel constricted by the do's and don'ts of religion, because I think we all have experienced it at some, I mean, a lot of us have experienced it at some point in our life. At least I did. I used to practice religion as a very strict set of regulations of do's and don'ts till I found my spirituality in my Sufi tradition. And you all might have heard that Rumi quote, out beyond the field of right and wrong, out beyond the ideas of right and wrong. There is a field, I will meet you there. So when I discovered my spirituality, my religiosity actually did not change. I am still very religious and I love the framework of my religion and I still adhere to all the do's and don'ts. I just don't feel constricted anymore. I found the zest and the reverence of life in my spirituality, and the do's and don'ts stopped becoming suffocating for me, because they are the ones which hold me together, which give me my foundation, which give me my strength, the do's and don'ts of the religion. And spirituality gives me joy and reverence and light. So they both can, for some people, exist together very well.
You just for me described enlightenment, and that's such an individual and not necessarily experienced place for the human person to be in. And you're enlightened. You're not,
I think that, go ahead.
Rules, but you've got, I mean, you understand ritual and its place and its guidance in your life, but you also have personal enlightenment. That's kind of the essence of God. Sorry.
One of the letters that Sophia and I didn't bring up was J. J is both for joy and it's also for justice. And in the history of Judaism, in the Hebrew Bible, you found a group of people who emerged who were critical of rituals and codes when they got in the way of justice. And so the prophets of Israel were a people who felt that God, you know, some would say, God is much more interested in justice than in rule following. And the priestly class was very, very interested in rule following. But the prophets were kind of critical of the priestly class. I'm talking about Jeremiah, Hosea, Isaiah, and Jesus. I think of Jesus as within the prophetic tradition of Judaism. So you remember Jesus says the Sabbath was not made for, man was not made for the Sabbath for man. And that's a way of saying, you know, it's not that we follow the rules to follow the rules. The purpose of the rules is to enhance life. So I think sometimes when justice comes up, also it's not only joy, but justice comes up, there may be room for critique of overly rule preoccupied religion. Tina, you want to say something?
Yes, I'd like for you, Jay, if you would, to give a definition of religion. From what I'm remembering, does it not have something to do with the word bind? But I don't mean bind in a pejorative way.
Yeah.
But could you explain a little bit more? Because I think so many people don't really know perhaps what the word religion means.
Okay, now, Dan, I saw you, are you waving goodbye? Or did you have your hand up, Dan? Waving goodbye, maybe. So the word religion, we don't know the actual etymology, but it seems to be connected with the word religare, which is a Latin word, and that's connected with the word ligament. So if you think of a ligament is something that binds things together. It holds things together. Okay. So just a very general definition of religion would be it's a set of ideas and ritual practices and beliefs and material objects, sanctuaries, mosques, Stars of David, that collectively try to help people bind their lives together individually and in community. And so I think that can be a fairly neutral way to define religion, such that you can say sometimes religion is wonderful in the way it does that. And sometimes religion is not wonderful in the way it does that. But think of something that binds things together. Don't just think of beliefs, think of ritual practices, think of customs. Together they do that binding. Religare, ligament, binding. Does anybody have any questions about, we'll close now. Does anybody have any general questions about the alphabet as a whole? that you might like to ask before we have our next guest next week? Sophia, do you have any last words you want to share with us? Unmute. Unmute. You're muted.
Okay, well, the last word of wisdom should come from you, Jay. You are our teacher, but I would like to inform everybody that next session is co-sponsored by Arkansas House of Prayer. So we will have Sister Deborah and you both. Our letter of the day would be S for silence. In fact, sacred silence. And I will send more information on that. One more logistical thing, if anybody ever misses a session, all of these sessions will be on our YouTube channel, posted the day we have the session. So yeah, that's it. Back to you, Jay.
All right, thanks to everybody for coming. In this course, there are no tests, no grades, no rules. But we're just glad you're here. Hospitality, yes. Hospitality, yes. So see you next time. Peace be with all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.